May 1945 in Europe brought not the joy of victory, but a strange silence amid the ruins. The war had ended, yet its scars left the continent in chaos. Scattered across roads, forests, factory wreckage, and shattered bridges lay thousands of tanks, once symbols of German military might. Panthers with their sloped armor, heavy Tigers, and various marks of Panzer IVs now stood as lifeless relics on the desolate landscape, abandoned by their crews, stripped of fuel, spare parts, and critical systems. These machines, which had once shaped battlefield tactics, had become cold witnesses to the destruction wrought in the Third Reich's final days. In Berlin, the Ruhr, and Bavaria, American, British, and Soviet troops encountered tanks abandoned in the most improbable locations. Some lined roadsides, coated in dust and rust, as if frozen in anticipation. Others lay hidden in forests, partially destroyed by explosions or with engines and transmissions deliberately sabotaged, efforts by crews to deny them to the enemy. Missing radios, removed guns, and stripped optics, often cannibalized for other vehicles, underscored the utter exhaustion of German armored forces, reduced from a formidable fighting arm to a chaotic heap of scrap metal. Compounding this were the effects of Allied bombing on Germany's industrial base. Factories that produced armored vehicles had been heavily damaged or destroyed. New hulls lacked complete systems, while half-finished vehicles and prototypes languished on assembly lines or in storage. Some, including components of the Maus program and E-series chassis, reflected the ambitious designs of German engineers, ambitions that collapsed amid disrupted supply chains and total industrial breakdown. Many tanks were in states requiring extensive repair even to move. Long before the end, shortages of fuel and relentless combat had strained maintenance capabilities. By capitulation, these issues had reached a breaking point. Thousands of vehicles were effectively immobilized, posing a practical dilemma for the Allies. What to do with this vast array of machinery, potentially dangerous if it fell into unauthorized hands? Against a backdrop of devastated landscapes and infrastructure, these German tanks became objects of scrutiny and analysis. The Allies recognized that each vehicle held valuable insights into German tactics, engineering, and combat performance. Systematic efforts were needed to secure, catalog, and evaluate them, beginning with the largest concentrations at depots and storage yards. Immediately after the surrender, the Allies established control over abandoned German armor. Every Panther, Tiger, or Panzer IV underwent inspection and documentation. In the American zone, technical teams cataloged vehicles at sites like Oberurzel and Geldorf, photographing hulls, recording serial numbers, and assessing engines, transmissions, and armament. In the British zone, Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, REME, units at Hillersleben and Sennelager evaluated combat viability and gathered data on design, weaponry, and engineering features. Soviet trophy brigades, operating across Silesia, Berlin, and East Prussia, focused on recovering as many vehicles as possible for study and training. Conditions varied widely. Some tanks retained intact hulls but suffered worn engines and unreliable transmissions. Others were mere shells, stripped of optics, radios, and guns to sustain remaining units. Prototypes and unfinished hulls from factories often lacked complete systems, victims of disrupted production and material shortages in the war's closing months. Documents recovered from workshops and depots, repair logs, schematic drawings, test reports, and maintenance plans helped reconstruct operational histories. However, much had been destroyed in the final weeks as German officers sought to conceal the extent of their industrial and technological capabilities. Securing the vehicles was a priority. Tanks abandoned in cities or along highways posed risks, not only technical hazards, but potential threats if repurposed by irregular groups or civilians scavenging metal. The Allies implemented strict procedures. Each vehicle was registered, surrounding areas cleared, and immobile or damaged tanks immobilized further. Particular attention focused on research and test facilities such as Kummersdorf, Hillersleben, and Haustenbeck. Here lay mouse hulls, experimental E-series chassis, damaged Jagdtigers, and Panthers awaiting repair. Testaments to late-war German engineering ingenuity that never reached production due to resource shortages and advancing fronts. Cataloging and control evolved into a massive undertaking. Databases recorded damage, missing components, and field modifications. This information formed the foundation for subsequent evaluations, helping allies understand why German tanks performed effectively despite mechanical vulnerabilities and maintenance challenges. By late summer 1945, most German armor was under Allied supervision, stored in yards, depots, and designated sites awaiting decisions on their fate, whether preservation for study, transfer to other nations, training use, or destruction to prevent future militarization. Detailed technical evaluations followed. In the United States, Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland became the primary center. From late 1945, Panthers, Tiger 1s and 2s, Jagd Panthers, and assault guns arrived for firing trials, mechanical endurance tests, armor penetration studies, and system reliability assessments. Results highlighted impressive firepower and optics, offset by chronic transmission and final drive failures. Lessons that informed American design priorities. British evaluations occurred largely in Germany. Engineers examined Panther sloped armor against Sherman and Churchill designs, assessed long-barrel guns and optics, and noted servicing difficulties without robust logistical support. While not leading to direct copies, these studies influenced early post-war British tank concepts and tactics. The Soviet approach emphasized quantity. Trophy units prioritized Panzer IVs, Panthers, and Stugs for crew training and combat testing. Findings echoed wartime experience. Strong frontal protection and high-velocity guns were undermined by mechanical unreliability under harsh frontline conditions. Most captured vehicles were scrapped by the early 1950s, but operational insights shaped Soviet tank doctrine. Experimental sites yielded especially valuable finds: mouse hulls and E-series chassis at Kummersdorf and Hillersleben, damaged Jagdtigers and Panthers at Haustenbeck, illustrating advanced late-war concepts thwarted by material shortages and battlefield pressures. Security protocols and restrictions governed handling. Occupation directives mandated registration, safeguarding, and prevention of unauthorized use. Disposal options reflected strategic priorities. Americans emphasized testing, Soviets accumulation and analysis, Britain's selective study within resource constraints. These efforts built a comprehensive knowledge base on German design strengths, weaknesses, and battlefield impact, influencing post-war armor development for decades. By mid-1946, systematic demilitarization began. The Allied Control Council classified remaining German armor as prohibited material, prohibiting German possession and mandating destruction. Operations targeted industrial centers in the Ruhr, Saxony, and Thuringia. Steelworks in Bochum, Essen, and Magdeburg processed columns of Panthers, Panzer IVs, and Stugs. Cutting torches and heavy equipment reduced armor to scrap for rebuilding bridges, factories, and housing, turning weapons of war into materials for reconstruction. Hundreds were melted down by late 1947, leaving only select examples for Allied study. Not all went to foundries. In rural areas, abandoned tanks served civil purposes. Along Austria's Enns River, Panthers and Stugs were buried in embankments for erosion control. Similar uses occurred in quarries and forests across Central Europe, gradually subsumed beneath soil and vegetation. Others became targets. British ranges at Lulworth received Panthers and Panzer IVs, American sites at Grafenwohr and Aberdeen, and Soviet training grounds followed suit for testing munitions, armor effectiveness, and crew proficiency. Surviving hulks were later scrapped. Cleanup extended to late fighting zones. Czechoslovak and Polish engineering teams cleared roads, forests, and defensive lines, sending wreckage to scrapyards or reconstruction projects. Unfinished prototypes, E-series hulls, mouse components, and experimental chassis were dismantled, erasing final traces of late German innovation. By 1948, nearly all German tanks had vanished from the landscape. Rumors of hidden caches proved unfounded or misidentified ruins. Europe's once dominant armored fleet was dismantled, recycled, or integrated into peacetime infrastructure, surviving only in documents, photographs, and a handful of preserved examples. Some vehicles found second lives abroad. France quickly fielded recovered Panthers in the 503rd Tank Regiment, appreciating their firepower and optics despite frequent breakdowns from worn transmissions and parts shortages. Withdrawn by 1951, their service influenced French armored organization and training. Czechoslovakia continued producing Hetzers on Panzer 38T chassis, exporting some to Switzerland. Panzer IVs and Stugs served until Soviet replacements arrived. Eastern European nations like Romania, Bulgaria, and Yugoslavia used captured or redistributed German equipment briefly before standardizing on T-34s and later models. Spain retained Panzer IVs and Stugs delivered in 1943 until the mid-1950s. Remaining units were sold to Syria in 1967, seeing frontline use into the 1970s, one of the last operational employments of World War II German armor. Post-war experience universally highlighted German tanks' maintenance demands. Improvised parts, cannibalization, and missing manuals complicated operations. Nevertheless, they influenced doctrine, promoting sloped armor, precise optics, and emphasizing reliability and logistical simplicity. By the mid-1950s, most nations phased out German equipment for standardized American or Soviet designs. Surviving examples entered museums. The Tank Museum at Bovington, the French Tank Museum at Saumur, and the Kubinka Tank Museum in Russia preserved key vehicles for posterity, monuments to engineering ambition, and reminders of how technological edge without sustainable support ultimately proved fatal. The German armored fleet that once dominated European battlefields was systematically dismantled, recycled, or repurposed. Only a few machines endured, yet their legacy profoundly shaped post-war armored warfare and military thought, illustrating both the achievements and critical limitations of Nazi Germany's tank designs. Preserved vehicles and records continue to inform our understanding of how engineering innovation, unbacked by robust logistics, becomes vulnerability in total defeat.